Hello, and welcome to the Drop of Light podcast with your host, Mike. And in a world full of darkness, I want to add a drop of light by talking about various things, mumbling on and on for 15 minutes or so. And this is episode 5. Today's topic I wanted to discuss is one that I wrote down months ago. So I don't 100% remember what I was thinking, but I reflected back on it and kind of remembered the gist of it, and something that I recently kind of came up against too. I'm going to more focus on the stuff that I was thinking on for the initial thing, and maybe it'll combine with some recent things as well. And it's the idea of free will and non-consent, I guess, and how those two play together. So the idea of like, or what's in our control, what's not in control, where does our free will exist? What are the areas where it doesn't? And what kind of things do we consent and non-consent to? Not from an idea of like relationships and boundaries, that might be a smaller part, but from idea of like what life kind of throws at us, which I guess includes relationships too. So if you think back, like, how do you feel if someone asks you, like, to what degree did you consent to this life experience? If I ask myself that, it's a really hard question to answer, because on one level I can say like, well, none of it. Like, I didn't choose where I was born, my like ethnicity, culture, geography, the people that come into my life, not so much control. Um, and my actions and effort too can have a limit. Like, well, there's biological limits, right? So where does control come in? And then on the other, this kind of metaphysical standpoint, it's like, um, maybe you've chosen all of this. Like, you unconsciously, it's an area you can't access, or not everyone can, maybe some people can, that you chose this exact experience to have, that everything is actually came down to a choice, um, which is interesting. And so including illnesses, including deaths and all that stuff, where it's the emotional mind can have a really hard time grasping with it, or maybe an easier one after some time, where it's like, I would not have chosen like the deaths that I've seen and all that stuff. Like that's really tough. Um, so where's the choice? Where's the not choice? Um, so that idea of like, where's the free will? I was having a conversation with some colleagues of like the idea of like you can control your attitudes and your behaviors. Or my phrase that I like is like, you have control over your attention and your actions. So, or attitude can also be intention, your intention and your actions, and maybe your attitudes and awareness, your attention, and how in having control over that, you have control over broader things. Like, you can't control what's going to come out of someone's mouth. You can't, and yet it doesn't stop us from trying, right? Like censorship, all that stuff, happens everywhere. Like, oh, you're not allowed to say that, talk about that. That's why there's some places where you can have those conversations, and places you can't. Ideally, the people that are close to you, you would feel less censored by. But if you feel censored by the people closest to you, that's a harsh reality. And the censorship might not be in the form of you're not allowed to say that, but like as soon as you talk about it, the person doesn't want to spend time with you. And then there's a quote I like of like, those who matter will understand, those who don't understand don't matter. So if you have people that you really want to tell things to because they're your family and things like that, um, and they don't understand you, that you reconcile, does that mean they don't matter as much? Does that mean there's like work, soul work or life work to do to disentangle that stuff? How does it all kind of play together? What parts, if any, do you have control over? Which reminds me another layer to it where regardless as if there's, because from like maybe a physical standpoint, it can be like if everything has a prior cause, like all the words I'm saying now, like I learned English because that was my circumstances. My speech is because of the way my body is formed. So everything has a like prior cause, and I'm just in effect playing it out. So what control am I having along this causal chain? So question there too. Or if is there some sort of energetic shifts that you can make to change the causal chain, but it's not a change like I want red versus blue, but it's like blue will slowly turn red over repeated period of time. Um, and what was the other point? Oh, so regardless of, because in terms of physical reality, we can't really measure, or like free will is not really measurable, right? Um, and if anything, sometimes when we try to measure it, we kind of get to a point where like it really feels like there's like a sense of determinism that we have a sealed fate. Um, but we can do a subjective study of asking if people believe they have free will or not. And it's shown that the people that believe they have free will tend to rank themselves higher in terms of life satisfaction. So regardless of the reality of free will or not free will, so this might kind of get at some people, believing that there is freedom um, gives you more hopefulness. So it's almost like if you have a sense of hopefulness, things will become more hopeful. Um, but then I guess you can be argued there can be people that feel everything's deterministic and deterministic towards hopeful outcomes, which would be interesting to study versus there seems to be a tendency with determinism that your kind of fate is sealed in a kind of negative way. Kind of like that already has like a negative connotation, like nothing else you can do. It's always going to play out that way. Like those words already, create an effect in your mind, even though ultimately they're neutral. I can already have this felt sense that it's kind of leaning a little negative, right? That is always going to be this way. You know, it is not a fun time. Or there is the other way. It was always going to be this way. It was always going to be so fun. And then you get into which I think where determinism kind of comes in is this all or nothing thinking. Like it's this way and there's no other way. Versus the free will aspect maybe is an opportunity to incorporate new perspectives. Although it's been this way, could there be more to the story? Could there have been some ground you haven't covered yet? Could there be some reason why the story is still playing out? Kind of this thought of like, if things were deterministic, if it's possible to know exactly how tomorrow will play out, there's kind of like tomorrow would have already played out. I think there's no kind of value for tomorrow playing out. The fact that tomorrow hasn't played out, that's the value part. That's the unknown. There can be shifts. You don't know the shifts tomorrow might bring. Albeit most likely the shifts are small. Sometimes they can be big. Yeah. I hope it's all kind of making sense. I realized that a live format might make more sense for these types of conversations. So that's something to think about in the future. Yeah, I've been holding my mic over my face. Hopefully it's still hearable. I'm gonna turn it up a little bit. There we go. So when it comes to free will, there's a lot of perspectives. This whole continuum. And the drop of light aspect, to incorporate some of that lightness, is to always kind of hold on to possibility in the face of the one track. To see the multiple tracks and to enjoy the both. Enjoy how things could play out in a not great way from your perspective or in a great way from your perspective. There's other idea I was kind of tackling with, and I would have left it for another episode, but no time like the present, because you never know how much time people can have. Is everything we describe, it gets into very like meta talk. And it started with describing God. But instead of jumping into that debate, like if we describe anything, like or that picture of like I don't know if I've ever seen it. It was from my undergrad of an elephant and like seven blind men, an elephant, and one person like feels the tail. Oh, that this is like very long and bushy. Someone it's like no, it's big like a tree trunk. And someone's like oh, it's sharp like fangs. Who's at the tusks? Or oh, it's like it's wrinkly at the nose. Depending on where you're looking at it, you describe it one way. And even the combination doesn't paint the entire picture of an elephant. If I would need the picture to kind of show it, but imagine like seven blind people touching an elephant at different points and just saying it's a different thing, but they're all touching the same thing. This idea kind of, we were talking about God, if there's so many different perspectives of God trying to describe the same thing, but it's like one perspective. And there's this saying, so I think it was like Sadhguru, and he was like something like the idea of God. I would say the idea of anything cannot be actually described. It has to be experienced. So it's an experience. Like with anything, like even driving a car, you have to experience it. You can describe it all you want, but until you experience it, it's going to be a lot different. Something about the experience of it is greater. So you can kind of play around with like, what's the experience that everything is predetermined tomorrow and see what the experience is. And you can have another day where you can experiment or experience of like, everything is open. Everything can change. My hand movement will change, like the butterfly effect will change the outcome hours from now, depending how I move my hand, how I conduct myself, and see which one makes you feel more alive and go with that. Yeah, I hope that made sense. So it's kind of like you just experience it rather than going to describing it, analyzing it, also just try to experience the thing you want to experience. There's a final point, but I lost it. Oh, it's similar when it comes to, I don't know if this is going to be another topic, but of like, if something is a lie or not. Like if you're, it's quite a really like, of like the truth does not need to be believed in. So if someone says to argue or convince you from the truth, like you don't have to. Like you don't have to argue physics, if that makes sense. Like you can just drop a ball and show that it works. Right. So like you experience physics. Yes, there's people that describe it and it helps in other ways, but a description doesn't help when experience can do it as well. So there's something about experiencing it that's just as powerful. And this saying came from like, say two people are arguing about the existence of a chair. Like, does a chair exist there or not? Like in a corner of a room. You can argue if it's there or not all you want, but you can just go and sit on the chair. There's a chair there. So it's like, that's the experience. of like, you can choose to spend time wanting to describe and describe and describe, but at some point there has to be just the experience component. And there is value to describing and stuff like that. I think that's kind of what makes experience special. That's different from description. Description can be something helpful when you can't experience it right now, right? So someone watched a really cool movie. You can't just run and watch the movie right away, but you can ask them like, oh, what was it like? If you want to experience some of it, but always know whatever the person describes it as will never be the actual thing. Description can only get at a small level. And then the argument comes down to like, what degree can a description cover the experience? Can it get to even 99, or is it always like only less than 10%? Or if there's a percentage point of being able to experience something fully. Yeah. So here it is, going from free will and consent and not consenting to things that come up in life, and the idea of experiencing versus describing. Fun stuff. Anyways, I wish you a great rest of your day wherever you are. And you are so deeply cared for. You are so deeply beautiful in all your ways. And you are so, so loved by this existence and by this experience. Take good care of yourself. Thank you.